Wow, this is exciting to think about. And so, because the environment was so stressed over there in China, this particular coronavirus just naturally emerged, like to almost fill a void there. And so, in that sense, it was predictable. It didn't necessarily come from a lab or all these places. And maybe you can explain that a little bit more to like the layman of how that could just happen there, or how that coronavirus can just become present.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of background on what is a virus first. A virus is not a living organism. And so we have severely miscategorized viruses as physicians and scientists as part of the microbiome. And you don't need to be a scientist to look up the words micro and biome. Micro meaning small, biome meaning living organisms. And so microbiome is a description of living organisms that are microscopic, meaning these ancient bacteria-like guys called archaea, then bacteria, then fungi, then protozoa, parasites. This extraordinary universe out there, and they so outnumber any biologic life the size of a human. This massive biology and life within the microbiome is huge. There's thought to be now 3.5 to 5 million species of just fungi. It's just like this extraordinary explosion of capacity and adaptation within the fungal kingdom alone. The viruses are not alive and therefore should not be categorized, as far as I'm concerned, in the microbiome, because they're not living organisms. They are a secretion of bacteria and multicellular organisms. And so if they come from bacteria, we happen to call them bacteriophage, but it's just a virus. And then coming out of a human system, for example, or another mammal, we call them viruses. But these are genetic secretions of living cells that don't pass any life capacity within that package of information. It's literally a communication tool for the genome to proliferate, to create adaptation and biodiversity. And so it is the device, it is the tool for life to quickly adapt and shift into a more intelligent life form. And so a virus is a package of genetic information that's targeted. This is the really fascinating thing. This isn't like just like oozing of genetic information. It's wrapped up just like a smart bomb to deliver the information right to the right place where it's most needed. And in the case of coronavirus, which has been around with us for, documented for over 740 years in interesting approach to record keeping and genomics, all the way back to potentially 1,200 years ago, one case. So coronavirus has been around for probably thousands of years, but we've been able to document it back to that far back. And so it's a very common part of the human experience. Coronaviruses cause many of the common colds we experience, etc. When an organism in great stress has the need for an adaptation, it can take something like a coronavirus and misspell the genetic information within that. And the misspelling will accelerate as the stress increases. And so it does this by actually intentionally having slightly sloppy machinery for repeating the genetic information within the viral genome. And so as the virome, as this extensive genomic collection of information starts to misspell, many of those will be irrelevant, just misspellings, and will go on to do nothing. Occasionally, you'll see an upregulation of function or an important structural adaptation represented in that genomic information. And therefore, when it enters an organism like a human, we take it into our genomics and we start to proliferate it out there to expand that information stream. And so, as we saw with corona and the vast majority of viruses on the planet, it's asymptomatic in almost all individuals that get it. And then a very small section of people will develop severe symptoms and disease and either become ill and recover or die. The pathway towards that is very regulated. And so viruses, we have this belief system, even as scientists, that, they're like these Trojan horses that come in and take over the mechanisms of our human cells to proliferate. It's nowhere near that reality. If that was true, we would have never existed, because there are 10 to the 31 viruses in the air that we breathe. There are 10 to the 31, and 10 to the 31, we're not good at math as a population. That's 1 with 31 zeros after it. Right? Remember, a billion is 9 zeros, and so 31 zeros on the end of that, and you're now 10 million times more viruses in the air than are stars in the entire universe, to put this in perspective, okay? And so then we look into the soils and we find another 10 to the 30 viruses there. And then we look into the ocean water and we find another 10 to the 31 viruses there. And so we are so surrounded by this genetic information that if it actually behaved such that every time it touched us, it would take over our machinery and just for its own good start to proliferate, we would never exist. We are the result of viruses. We are not being attacked by viruses. And when I say that, that's quite literal. With the recent genomic sequencing, we're now getting good at understanding which parts of our DNA were inserted directly by viruses. And we are now have counted up to more than 50% of the human genes resulting from direct viral updates. And at least 10% of our genes are direct viral updates from retroviruses like HIV. And so over the last 100 years, we have demonized the very mechanisms by which we have become real. And that's a terrifying mistake to make, because when your paradigm is so reversed as a scientist that you are taught to fear and attack the very things that built you, you are now going to engineer your own extinction. And we have done that through the advent of antimicrobials, antivirals, antifungals, and the like. Now, there's many doctors listening right now who are saying, well, that's got to be BS, because I see patients dying of pneumonia, and if I give them an antibiotic, they improve. This is where we, again, fail to see the big picture, and we start to measure outcomes by 2 weeks instead of 2 years or 20 years in these individuals. And what we now know is that a single course of antibiotics undermines human biology immediately as we destroy the fabric of the organic soil of our microbiome. A single course of antibiotics has now been documented to increase your risk of major depression in the next 12 months by 17%, your risk of major anxiety disorder by 24%. If you get 2 courses of antibiotics in the next year, over a 12-month period, your risk of a major depression event is now 44%. Your risk of a massive anxiety disorder is 52% higher. So it's this radical undermining of our brain and our neurologic function when we just take an antibiotic. But more terrifyingly, if you look at the United States, I've shown these maps thousands of times to audiences, but you can look at the antibiotic prescription rate per state within the United States and show a perfect correlation to the risk of death from cancer in those states. So the higher the rate of antibiotic prescription, the more likely you die from cancer.
And why is that?
The short-sighted.
Why is that direct correlation with cancer?
Yeah, it's an important question that started to emerge in around 2005 to 2010. So 15 years ago, we started to get enough genomic sequencing capacity looking at the gut microbiome for the first time, which we discovered was an entire universe of intelligence within our gut. And in that, we started to realize that people that were missing specific species of bacteria within their gut flora were at very high risk for specific cancers. Meaning if you lose these types of bacteria, you'll get breast cancer. If you lose these types of bacteria, you'll get colon cancer. If you lose these bacteria, you'll get prostate cancer. And so it was very specific. It wasn't like a general, poor bacteria means cancer. It was very specific, cancer specific. And that was actually the turning point of my career. I started to study nutrition. I had been doing cancer chemotherapy research at the University of Virginia. I was developing a new chemotherapy from vitamin A compounds. And in that march into vitamin A, I started to study nutrition for the first time. And in that journey, it became obvious that I had totally missed the boat. I had gotten completely confused in my own journey as to what cancer was and how we would treat it. And, that sobering moment where you realize not a single case of cancer in history had ever been caused by a lack of chemotherapy. And so that was a devastating, realization. And I think that we have to come around quickly to the realization that the soil within our gut is actually the mechanism by which we produce health. And when we undermine the soil, the plant life dies. And in this case, that happens to be us. And so we have to really be sobered by the reality that we're undermining specific niches of the soil organisms and the soil vitality within us to produce this cancer epidemic.
Wow. And you're talking about the soil that we grow our food in, or are you talking about soil that gets in our system?
I'm talking about the soil that we grow our food in indirectly, but ultimately I'm talking about the organic soil that should be your intestinal environment. So your gut, if you look at your stool, that is compost. This is the ultimate soil within you. And so when you flush the toilet, how the heck did it start looking like that? Like you just ate a few hours ago and it looked like, beets and sauerkraut and everything else on your plate and cabbage and all these colors, and it comes out looking like soil. You are a composting machine for the microbial intelligence within you. And just as you put compost into your garden expecting life to be more abundant, we have so forgotten that process in our bodies. And so we keep taking drugs and supplements as this kind of end stage management of diseases that are manifesting from a lack of soil health within our intestinal, organic garden. And we're accelerating that then by destroying the actual soils of the earth, by which now our food system is lacking the nutrients that would fuel our diverse ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, microbiome soils within us. And we've laced those foods with antibiotics, namely the herbicides, most specifically Roundup and glyphosate.